morning, good afternoon, listeners, and welcome back to another Candid Coffee. And today, let me tell you a little bit about the guest that I have with me. And I'm so excited. I'm like a little child rubbing my hands together because I have with me one of my favorite people in the whole world. I have with me Andrea Westmeyer. Andrea, welcome to Candid Coffee.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, and I'm looking forward to it as much as you are.
So let me tell you why Andrea is one of my favorite people. So I came over to the US about 8 years ago, and in my first job, I met Andrea because she had her own company. She was this powerful woman that ran her own company, but more than that, she was just this amazing soul. And I knew there was something special about her, regardless of the work that we were doing together. Fast forward to where we are today, and Andrea has started this organization called Fantastic Humans, all about telling really impactful stories of people that change lives around them. And of course, that has always touched my heart. So, Andrea, welcome, and share with us a little bit, share with the listeners your journey.
I'm happy to. You're going to make me cry. You're so kind. Well, in terms of my professional experience, when I graduated from college, we were talking about this earlier, that I had both degrees in journalism, public relations, and music. And I really thought I wanted to, I was thinking about going into a music career, but somehow my freshman year, it was tugging on me. Well, how will you make, how do you make money in music? I didn't feel I was that top 2% that would make a living at it. And so I said, okay, let's go into advertising, which is what I pursued, and worked for Young and Rubicam agency and had the opportunity to work on some very large brands. And then, which had some interesting experiences as a woman, a young woman, who quickly had the opportunity to have a fair amount of, what's the right word, just autonomy and reign to make some things happen, and how male clients in particular, responded to that. And then after that, I really found I was drawn into more of that startup environment. And I guess it makes a lot of sense because I come from a family of entrepreneurs, both my parents and grandparents on one side. And I just really like the nimbleness and how you can try things, test, shift. And so I worked for a company that created the world's first full color touchscreen on a musical instrument. So it was high tech, it was music. They loved me because I had this strangely a really good fit for their needs, and because music teachers were one of their target audiences, etc. So that was really interesting because it was my first exposure to VC funding and presenting to a group of people that have high expectations. And then after that, one of the agencies I hired while I was a client ended up asking me if they would come into a very senior leadership role. And I did that for about a year and then said, you know what, time to leave this market. I want to go into a much bigger market. I wanted to move to New York City. And so I went to the CEO and said, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'd love to do it with you. If that's not possible, no harm, no foul. I will, I'll land, I'll find something. And he said, you know what? I think that's a great idea. We already had a couple of people there that were much more junior. And so that's where I landed in New York City, went to a CEO roundtable in pharma, which is how that was the beginning of our path coming together, and realized, wow, there's some incredible data. And I started developing relationships there. And ultimately what brought me to meeting you, because I was doing a lot of business development. After that, then, of course, you mentioned Measurement Mojo was another company. Then I started completely on my own, which is focused on measuring and optimizing omni-channel communications. And then after that, basically, the impetus was the death of my only sibling about 6 years ago. I really took inventory and decided, you know what? It's time to write the next chapter. And that brought me to Epiphany Project, which is a company that will do many things. But the first project at this company is Fantastic Humans, which is a television show about tragedy and transformation and people and the impact that they make in their transformation.
Wow. Andrea, I mean, so much to unpack on your journey, right? Apart from being a young woman breaking barriers in business, starting your own business is hard just generally, but having to do it when starting in a new place in New York City, which is not your hometown, learning a new environment, and then making a full transition into a completely different career when presented with life alternatives, right? Oh, wow. So impactful. If you had to share with our listeners, Andrea, one or two nuggets for you that your journey has really, brought front and center, one or two learnings, what would you say those would be?
Seek to understand. Um, and then one of the things that I've learned just in the last 5 years, well, that's not true. It's interesting. I've been nibbling around the edges of what I'm doing today for probably 20 years, except I did it in the context of behavioral science. I'm an assessment junkie. I've had everyone, Myers-Briggs, Trimetrics, Strength Finders, Colby. And I just thought this was so interesting. And it's about what makes us tick. And I was as curious about what made me tick as all the people that maybe would, report into me, because we all know in business, there are days that have friction points in them. And how do you address those, manage those, resolve them? And what I liked about assessments is that that really gave us language by which we could all talk about how we maybe felt, and better articulate our point of view. And so that was really when I figured out, okay, there's this thing called triggers. And I learned going through all those assessments, that there were certain circumstances that would tend to trigger me. And the more I had awareness of that, the better I would respond and be a more balanced human in the scenario. And that's, of course, what I wanted to be the best. We all want to be the best versions of ourselves. And then with that insight, I was able to, I think, be a much more effective leader. Now, granted, we all have our moments, right, but I never considered the part about, well, why am I getting triggered? What's at the core of why I get triggered? Okay, great, Andrea, you've learned how to kind of control it. Because, the other thing that happens is when we're triggered is, what do? We go in here and we don't even listen to what the person in front of us is still saying, because we're completely in our own head. Again, why didn't I have more awareness of that? Not sure. But then all these years later, and I mentioned the turning point with my brother's passing, it was very fascinating. There was a book, I should have grabbed it off my shelf, called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And I had bought that book previously before my brother died. It caught my attention on Amazon. I got it. I opened it. I didn't get it. He's talking about this noise in your head. And I'm like, huh, what? And I set it aside. After my brother passed, literally within 3 weeks of his funeral, for some reason, I was nudged to pick that book up again. And I read it and went, oh my God, I get it. I understood the noise. And I was like, wow, this is the stuff I've been trying to manage. How about we just resolve, the source of the trigger? And that's really, and I'm like, if I feel this way, there has to be all these other people. I can't be the only one, especially in business. You look around, you see who gets really excited and can get a little out of control. That person has got some things they should probably work on. And so that's really why I was like, you know what? I need to do something where I can help other people figure this out faster than I did, because I've spent 6 years now reading and studying and coaching and Lord knows I have a long ways to go, but my awareness is so much more heightened.
I appreciate you sharing that, Andrea. And awareness is such a big part of us just becoming aware of ourselves. And if we are more aware of ourselves, we're more aware of the role we play in our place in
Mm-hmm.
society, in groups, in communities. And I'm going to shift us a little bit because you shared an interesting nugget with me when we started this conversation. So we are here talking about board positions and board seats and board service.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrea's got such a remarkable background. And you've sat on 6 boards
Mm-hmm.
from the age of 25, which I'm trying to think, I didn't even know who I was at 25 years old. So that's amazing. But you've also shared with me that these boards that you've sat on have ranged from startups right up to fully fledged, more than $50 million companies or profit generating companies as well. So really thinking through what it takes to start a business versus what it takes to maintain a thriving, strong, profit-driven organization.
Mm-hmm.
Andrea, that is amazing, right? What has been some of the things you've learned while being on a board?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not obviously, they are organizations, living, breathing organizations like any company that I've been involved with in my day job. Um, and I think that what I've noticed consistently is that there's not generally a good handbook for how to be a good board member.
Mm,
And so I would always encourage people to, ask if there's a board profile. There should be that describes expectations.
mhm,
I would get clear on what the time and how much time is expected. We all live every day making assumptions and we know what that creates. So you want to be clear if your goal is to be an active participant and really bring value to that organization, be clear about that. And especially when it's in the nonprofit world, which is all of my experiences, sometimes there's a charitable contribution level that you are asked to make or encouraged, and when they won't specify, I'll just ask, what is the range of I don't need to know who, but what is the giving level
mm,
from lowest to highest, because I want to know, where, and then it's up to me to choose where I want to live in that range, right? um, and I would say that a lot like a company, when you're in leadership, that especially if the board is a little larger, and by that I mean if it's over a dozen people, and I sit on boards that are 35, there's one thing that you need to keep in mind is that that creates enough noise in the room that those quieter people will lay low. And
mm,
usually when people are quiet, they're very thoughtful and reflective people, and you want to hear from them. So, whenever I either chair a committee or chair a board, I really try to be, just as I do in my work, I want to hear from everyone.
mm.
And that's some of those same principles definitely apply.
Absolutely. And I'm linking this through to what you've just shared around awareness, right? Especially when you link that to the fact that there may be people sitting on a board who are introverts and are quieter.
Mhm.
It makes me think if you are more aware of yourself and you're more aware of your surroundings, then how do you give space to those people who could probably bring a different way of thinking, right?
Mhm.
To the board service or board
Right.
table.
Well, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, and that's where all my years of assessment work come into play, but now more on that spiritual intuitive side where, okay, pay attention. How are you feeling? And the same is true if you're feeling that someone has got angst and they're not expressing it. I
Yeah.
never want to put a person on the spot,
Yeah.
but you can ask questions and you can probe.
Hmm.
And, at the end of the day, when you need the consensus and the group needs to land, and be a voice for that organization, you want to make sure you can never have 100% of people on board, but you want to do your best to get everyone collectively in a place of, okay, I can live with that. Yes, I can line up behind that thought or that suggestion, etc. And of course, with boards, the biggest, I mentioned there's not often a great board profile. It's understanding your role is generally strategic and financial, accuracy and integrity, right?
Mm.
You're not in operations.
Right.
And I think all of us, because we probably, if we come from a corporate environment, we've come through operations, even if we're in a more senior position now, and we have that's a comfortable place, right? And we'll fall
Yeah.
back into that and question. It's easy for me to look at the fundraisers who are most like business development people and go, well, have you done, and so you have to, I'm careful and I look for the entry points. If I really do think there's a gap, I'm not going to ignore it, but I find an appropriate way to share that with the most appropriate person.
Wow. I think that's very powerful as well, right? In saying, know your role on the board, understand your role. Your role is not operations, your role is more strategic and oversight, right? More than anything else. So, I mean, already two incredible pieces of, or nuggets of wisdom that you've shared, Andrea. Awareness of everyone who sits around the table and which voices are known, which voices are unknown or unheard at this point, right? And giving space to them. And now, as you've just shared, is know your place on the board. What is your job to be done on the board? Oversight and strategy versus operations. So, Andrea, I'm going to ask you as well. So you've sat on the 6 boards, and is there anything you have not liked about being on a board? Something that you go like, not my favorite.
Well, I would say that it is, if you're going to be on a board, that you need to be all in. It's a little frustrating to me when, and I would say only one of my, maybe a couple of the boards I've been on or have enough notoriety that maybe people would seek it out to add it to the resume. And, you just, and I'm very realistic about board work like this because some people have more time to give, some people have financial resources to give, and others have some combination of both, which I've kind of always been in that bucket. I've been willing to give the time, but I didn't write the biggest check by any stretch.
Right.
And I recognize that we have to have that blend and that balance, as well as really thoughtful distribution of skill sets when you invite, because I'm often now in a position where I'm part of the recruitment or evaluation of new potential board members. And a really well-run board will have a very detailed profiling of all their board members' strengths, both as how they identify them personally and how their resume would traditionally describe it, right? And then you can be more clear about where those gaps exist. A lot of times, it's like audit committee because and we have a board survey where they ask us what we would like to do. And I chair an institutional advancement for my alma mater, which is, of course, fundraising, right? And that I come from a very strong business development background. And the one committee I say I do never want to sit on is audit. You need to have your finance people there who know I can ask curious higher level questions. And so if you want so I did serve on it for a 3-year term. I felt out of my depth, but I did my best. So I think that's, part of it, in terms of, if you're going to be on a board, be prepared to really contribute, be prepared to read the materials. The board any board I've ever been on is, depending on the frequency, a lot of them met monthly, some met quarterly. Usually there were several hours of prep and just ongoing maintenance, reading communications that are coming from maybe the president of the organization or the CEO of the organization to me as part of executive committee or board chair. And you have to attend to that.
Right, right. Oh, I love this as well. You are building this resume or this repertoire of incredible nuggets of information. And so knowing your strengths, as you said, is really important, right? Knowing where you can add value and that's fantastic. We've run this podcast, over a series of months, and I had a guest, Michael, a couple of months ago, who spoke about exactly the same thing, Andrea, right? And when you spoke, immediately it made me think about what Michael had said. is the magic happens when where your passion and your strengths intersect with what is needed by the organization, right, at that particular time. And I'm hearing very much the same from you as well. So know your strengths, know your passions, and know where you're going to add value where the organization needs the value to be added. And then be prepared to do the work, right? The work's not going to happen on its own. So reading material is important. Showing up is important. I love that. And I think that's an important point that you share, Andrea, because how often board service is glamorized, right? That it's very glamorous to do board service, but it doesn't come without its work, right? It's not something where you just pitch up in a meeting and not do the background work that is asked of you at that moment in time as well.
Absolutely. And, you made a good point, and I'll just elaborate it on a little bit in terms of, you talked about the intersection of passion and your skill, I believe is how you said it. I think I would encourage someone to think about that just in ahead of even any boards they choose to pursue or make someone aware of. In some cases, people came to me, and others I went, no, that's something I want to do. And I'll just reach out and make it known that I have interest, right? That can happen both of those ways. But I've always had an appetite for arts and education. And about in my early 40s, I realized, hey, food insecurity, the hierarchy of needs, I was living up, in the education, things that make your life improve quality. But how about we get to the things that are required for existence? Right. I realized in my 40s, wow, food insecurity is something. And so I found a board that I thought was interesting, and they were very pleased to have me come on board because I used it to educate myself on that. Right. And on that topic, and be a more rounded individual walking on this planet. But it does, if you know what those interests are, or in that case, something that I really wanted to passionately learn more about, and obviously I shared very quickly with the leadership of the board, I don't come with years of experience around what food insecurity issues exist at the state, national, and global level, but I want to learn and I want to help change.
Right. So, that is powerful, because I'm hearing from you as well, while you may know some of your strengths and know what your passions are, it is important to reflect as well, right? Take some time for self-reflection to understand how could you use your skills to affect something that you're not necessarily thinking about today, but may be important if you took the time to reflect on that. Yeah. Especially when you shared this, hierarchy of needs, and you asked yourself, where am I playing today? Where do I actually want to play in the future? It's very, very powerful. So, Andrea, you've also shared that you are part of the recruitment committees on some of your boards. When you are recruiting, are there any key characteristics that you are looking for in recruitment?
And one of the committees I served on recently that I'm just over the moon about was actually recruitment for the institution itself. So I was on the committee that was looking for a new president of the college, and that's a big one, right? And so that was very fascinating. I was able to pull a lot of my insights from interviewing in the corporate world, but I was also the one going, oh, we're going to use assessments, right? Can I recommend some? And we did, and and everyone on the committee found that useful. And it would be really lovely if that could be put into practice in recruiting board members, but it depends. If you were a for-profit environment, I would completely recommend that. Right. Because they probably have the financial, most of the assessments aren't that expensive, but there is some kind of a cost there. Nonprofits are going to probably be reticent unless someone makes that contribution, which I actually have done in the past because I think it's that useful. But it just helps you understand what a person's real passion and where their energy comes from, and maybe shares it in a way that's not, the person may or may not have as much awareness around that. Okay, so that's a very sort of very specific way. But in terms of recruitment in general, I just, first of all, the person has to, you have to have some reason to believe that they would have interest in
Right.
whatever your particular board is governing, right? And then, LinkedIn is a wonderful tool because it helps us understand that much more readily than we could when I was in my late 20s and 30s. Um, and trying to think if there's, it just seems so practical to me, and I'm just needing to articulate it. There might be something new and different in it. I think it's the interest. Again, you go back to that board survey I talked about.
Right.
Where are our gaps? What skill sets are we seeking? And it's not just skill sets. So I'm going to tap my DEI drum, which I'm a huge, huge supporter of. um, Not only obviously for women, but everything that diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and some of which you cannot see. And so, it's having that awareness. And so that is also the other piece. And that's what's, I love serving in higher education because I think they're kind of on the forefront. They're really, I mean, they're all people that are highly educated that are in those organizations. I love, I just have a bachelor's, and I hang around a lot of PhDs, which there are moments where that's challenging because I am a bit more of an activator than sometimes highly reflective people. However, it's that balance, and it's the fact that they recognize the importance and help the rest of us on the board recognize the absolute importance of those kinds of topics.
That is wonderful. I mean, again, I think there's so much value and wisdom in what you've just shared, right? Because many of our listeners, Andrea, will be looking for what are recruiters thinking of when I apply to a board or someone's thinking about board service. And I mean, you mentioned the LinkedIn profiles, right? That you would look at, and that number one is update your profile. Make sure your
Mhm,
profile is truly reflective of who you are,
mhm,
um, and that it showcases who you are as well. Because you're going to look at it, right, from what you've just shared. You're going to go on and check who is this person? Who is Arvashni? What does
yeah.
she like? What does she not like? What is she commenting on? Right? Gives you a good idea on who I am, or in this case, whoever our listener is going to be. Um, I love also what you shared around there is definitely looking for where the gaps in the board may lie, right? So you know what the gap in the board is through your board surveys, and you would be looking for complementary skill sets, experiences to be able to make sure that you have a more fuller board, right? A more complete board in that sense. You also mentioned passions, understanding the person and whether whether the values and the objectives of the organization meet the values and objectives of the person themselves. Always a good thing to have, right? So you're not having any complete mismatches. And then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And
Mhm.
that's important as well, Andrea. I'm just thinking about, generally the listeners to this podcast as well. They are either there's a significant amount of women on the board that listen, people from diverse backgrounds, of course. And as you mentioned, when we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not necessarily what you only see in front of us. So really, really important. Andrea, this is fantastic. I think our listeners are going to love also teasing out what do board recruiter or people who are recruiting on boards think about. And you have given us both sides of the equation. You've given us your experience on a board. I mean, fantastic experience on a board, and what you would look for as you recruit for boards. I'm sure the the next president of your institution, or at that time, would have loved to have known this, right, before he or she had actually applied or had their interview with you.
Yes. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy. It's cool when you get to help influence a decision of that magnitude. And,
Absolutely.
I also am proud of the fact that my intuition has really gotten a lot better because I read her we had 45 applicants across the country, and read her resume, and I narrowed it to three, and I picked her out, and I said, that's our president. And I said it to our board chair, and he said, Andrea, can't pick that early. And I said, okay. And keep in mind, in higher ed, their vitae is elaborate, and there's written word. I mean, you really get a sense of a person as compared to some of the more corporate types of resumes and things. And in the first Zoom interview, I was like, yep, that's her. And yet I said, okay, Andrea, be open. And then after we met in person, they said to the board chair, I hope our whole committee comes along, because if they don't, there's going to be a heck of a pitch being made. And they all the plane landed with the same person.
Wow. It's interesting. I mean, what you say about your intuition, right? And I'm just thinking about what you've shared. From the age of 25, you are sitting on boards, you are observing for this period of time what works, what doesn't work, who works and who doesn't work as well in a board. So it's, when you talk about your intuition, I'm just thinking that intuition became that good because all of the years of experience and expertise, right, that it took to get there. That's fabulous, Andrea. So we've almost come to the end of our podcast. And of course, speaking to you is always such a joy in my life because you bring such warmth and energy and positivity to a conversation. But I would love, Andrea, for you to share with our listeners what brings you joy, what makes your heart sing.
I would say that it's creative expression. And it's whether that's in singing, or if that's in designing a physical space, or sharing human stories in a way that touches people's hearts.
I love that. And sharing human stories, which is what you do beautifully with fantastic humans as well. Andrea, today has been fabulous. I think our listeners got so much, or will get so much out of this conversation. I am just thinking, I have 4 pearls of wisdom from how to be on a board, driving up your awareness, knowing your role, right? What you should or shouldn't do, know your strengths, your passions, and be prepared to do the work, right? When you're on the board. And then you've shared with us these pearls of wisdom as what to think about when you're recruiting, right? Making sure you have your profile updated, really, really strong, understanding your own strengths. Know that a board is going to look at your strengths in conjunction with what they need on the board as well to make the board more complete, and understand that a board is also looking to increase their diversity on their board as well. Was fabulous. But all of it pales in comparison for you speaking about how you really want to bring to the forefront the stories of people and really communicate the impact that human beings can have on each other. Andrea, thank you. Thank you so much. Any last words from you?
I think you did an awesome job of capturing that. I should have written it all down because you said it in far fewer words. But no, it's been wonderful, and it's just a joy to see your transformation as well.
Awesome. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, it's been another wonderful episode with Andrea Westmeyer joining us on Candid Coffee. I look forward to meeting you again on the next Candid Coffee, and hopefully we'll have as much fun as we've had today with Andrea. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us.